Yes, relationships can change. In recent weeks, the U.S. has called into question our decades-long relationship of cooperation. While I welcome the temporary suspension of U.S. tariffs and very much welcome the joint plan to address the scourge of fentanyl, recent events have been a wake-up call for Canadians. The world has changed, and we too must change to realize the full promise of our great country. Since I launched my campaign a few weeks ago, I've heard from people across the country that they too want change. Canadians want change with a plan that stands up for Canada and creates an opportunity for all Canadians. Canadians want change with a new, positive leadership that ends division and builds together. Now, I'm not a politician. I am a pragmatist. And so if I see something that's not working, I will change it. And that's why last week I proposed a new climate policy, eliminating the consumer carbon tax, having large polluters pay Canadians to make climate-smart choices, and helping our countries leapfrog their American competitors in global markets. Canada needs more of this type of change. Change that puts money in people's pockets. Change that makes our companies more competitive. Change that builds the strongest economy in the G7. Now we face a very different world to one we've known all our lives. A world in which Americans have become more our neighbors than our good friends. And it can feel bewildering at first, but if we take control, it will be empowering. And here's how we do that. We need to distinguish between what we can't change, what we can influence, and what we can and must change to build an even better Canada. We need to understand what we can influence. Look, the world is being fundamentally transformed. The old rules-based order is finished, but a new one, a new system, has not yet emerged. And Canada should now work with like-minded nations to create a trading system that is consistent with our values and that builds our prosperity. Whether we can influence President Trump is debatable, but I think we can, if we listen to what Americans want and respond in ways that are best for Canada. However, we need to be crystal clear about our bottom lines. This proud country will never be part of the United States in any shape or form.
Hear, hear.
We can and must change our government to become more effective. Canadians deserve a government that works for them, a government that's focused on outcomes, not spending, a government that spends less and invests more. In the coming weeks, I'll propose a new approach to federal budgeting that will save precious taxpayer dollars while catalyzing the enormous investments that Canada needs to fully realize its promise. We can and must change how much of your hard-earned money you get to keep. Canada needs a middle-class tax cut, and my government will give them one. Young Canadians need a boost to their incomes so they can catch up after being knocked sideways by the pandemic and the housing crisis. Here, too, my government will deliver. And all Canadians deserve more competition in our economy so that they can get the best value for their hard-earned dollar. We can and must change how we build. This is a pivotal time for our economy, a time to build, and my government would catalyze enormous private investment to build millions of new homes for younger Canadians, to make the AI revolution work for all Canadians, and to build a clean energy superpower that will power, literally, our prosperity. But too often, we've had permitting delays, regulation, and red tape that has stopped or slowed economically critical projects, including ports, mines, and energy infrastructure. We must remove these barriers to spur progress and build for Canadians. I want to be crystal clear about this. My government will use all its powers to protect Canadians and to build in the national interest. The Government of Canada has extraordinary powers at its disposal today to respond to a national crisis. And Donald Trump's aggression against Canadian livelihoods and workers constitutes just such a crisis. And since it's a time to build, we can change how builders are rewarded in this country. That's why I will reverse the government's capital gains tax increase, not least in recognition of the vital role that builders play in shaping our country's future and ensuring we drive investment, innovation and growth. Je veux être clair. Avec mon leadership, le gouvernement utiliserait tous ses pouvoirs pour protéger les Canadiens et les Canadiennes et pour bâtir notre économie. Le gouvernement du Canada a des pouvoirs extraordinaires pour répondre à une crise économique nationale. Et les attaques constantes de M. Trump envers les emplois des Canadiens et des Canadiens constituent une telle crise. Il faut bâtir. Et donc, on doit aussi choisir comment on récompense ceux et celles qui bâtissent. C'est pourquoi je vais renverser la hausse des impôts sur le gain en capitaux du gouvernement, en reconnaissant l'importance de ceux et celles qui bâtissent le Canada de demain et en veillant à ce que nous stimulions l'investissement, l'innovation et la croissance. I'll have more to say about this in the weeks ahead, but for now, I just want to underscore that I couldn't be more serious. I will do whatever it takes to strengthen our economy and to protect Canadians. We can and must change so that we have one Canadian economy instead of 13. That means we need to harmonize the tangle of rules and regulations at all levels of governments that have meant that Canada, at least the Canadian economy, is less than the sum of its parts. We must break down barriers between provinces so that all Canadians have full access to our resources. Above all, in a divided world, we must rely more on each other because we are always stronger together. We can and must change our major trading partners. Canada and the United States have the most important commercial relationship in the world, and long may it remain so. But now that U.S. priorities are shifting, we need to change our priorities in ways that work best for Canada. We know we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. And so, while we should remain closely integrated with the United States in the auto sector, in energy and security, in the new areas that will drive jobs and competitiveness in this century, we must diversify our trading relationships. We should become the essential trading partners of countries that share our values, including the UK, the EU, and leaders in Asia. And we can do so through our leadership in clean energy, in critical minerals, and in the intelligence infrastructure of the AI revolution. We must leverage these strengths for the benefit of Canada and all Canadians. To do so, we have to create supply chain certainty by protecting economically critical infrastructure. And that starts with building and expanding our transportation corridors that connect Canada to global markets from coast to coast to coast. That includes our railways, ports, roads and bridges, trucking routes and energy corridors. It will require collaboration and partners with our workers and builders. We want employers to engage early, address issues openly and transparently, and negotiate agreements quickly, ensuring workers and their families are spared unnecessary economic upheaval. But we have to stop holding back our own progress and instead work together to keep Canada moving forward. And finally, we can and must change to make Canada and Canadians more secure. Now, the one thing I've learned over the many years of managing crises is that plan beats no plan. Plans create focus, discipline, and the energy that major changes a crisis demands. And make no mistake, we are in a crisis. We can do little to change the external forces that are causing it, but we can act as Canadians. There's a fever gripping America. And while it rages, Canadians will remain resolute and true to our values. While America engages in a war on woke, Canadians will continue to value inclusiveness. While America shuns the vulnerable, we will continue to show solidarity with one another. While America attempts to turn back the clock, Canadians will build sustainability for future generations. Before America's fever passes, we must seize this moment for Canada. This is the time to change. This is our time to build. This is the time for Canada. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, everyone.
Merci.
And I
Merci, thank you.
merci, and I
We'll
look
now-
forward to taking your questions.
We'll now
Good morning, Mark. This is, pardon my quivering lips, this is Pratyush Dayal from CBC News Windsor. What would you be doing differently or similarly regarding the tariff threats right now, and what would be your action plan to support and save the jobs in the auto sector, specifically out here in Windsor?
Yeah, very good. Well, the first thing to say is that I very much join others in supporting the government's approach in terms of negotiation. We have one negotiating team with the United States, and foursquare behind that any perspectives I would give in private. Look, I will say, given that, two things. One, it is possible that, and some degree probable, that the broadest negotiations will certainly extend beyond the next few weeks. The uncertainty that's been created by these discussions, I think, increases the need to look at USMCA, or CUSMA as we define it, as we describe it, look at it in its entirety, and reinforce it, and build forward going forward so that that's there. So I think negotiations will extend, and I would very much like to be part of those. Irrespective, which is the second part of your question, and it's an important part, irrespective of those negotiations, the first and best thing that we can control is to be masters in our own house, which we are. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous, and it's to build and reinforce the economy here at home. And so some of the measures that I outlined, adjusting in our tax system, both for individuals and for companies, supporting builders with government programs that catalyze it, supporting action by speeding up permitting and other actions. You know, this great bridge, and I pay tribute to the workers that are constructing it, those workers were held back for many, many years by slow progress on permitting and agreement. It was, of course, a cross-border agreement, but I remember even 20 years ago when it was still a concept. And our workers can do enormous things if governments partner with them and then get out of the way and allow them to build. And that's at the heart of what we can do as a country, irrespective of how well those broader negotiations go.
And Mark, would you bring back the federal EV incentive plan or add more money to the current one?
Yeah,
And
I think, yes. With respect to EV incentives, the climate plan that we announced last week, which focuses on having large polluters pay for climate-smart choices, that creates the ability and resources that could provide additional incentives for through federal programs for EV, and certainly my government would be looking at that going forward. Thank you.
Rusty Thompson from AM 800 CKLW. Windsor Essex is on the front lines of everything that's going on right now with the tariff threats and whatnot. How would you shock-proof an area like this that faces so much turmoil based on the headwinds and which way they're blowing?
Yeah, it's hugely important. I think there's a couple of things to recognize. First, under the current CUSMA agreement, as you know, there is a 10-year window that the agreement, at least legally, and Canadians, when we sign an agreement, we respect the legal aspects of those agreements, so it provides some degree of legal certainty, although that may have to be litigated. I recognize that, Rusty. So I think what we would want to do is to have the discussion starting with particularly the industries in Windsor Essex. In other words, and I'll start with automotives and all the components of the automotive supply chain. After all, the Auto Pact led ultimately to the Free Trade Agreement, led ultimately to NAFTA, led ultimately to CUSMA and the next negotiation. This is one of the great commercial relationships, engineering relationships in the world. It is a huge benefit to both our countries, and we build out from that. So I would look to do that, and do that in a way that works in a more competitive world, and think about the external perimeter consistent with an auto sector that needs to grow for generations. Thank you.
Just as a follow-up, are you concerned, though, then that any deal that is negotiated is going to be solid enough, given that, you know, the trade agreement that was just agreed under Donald Trump's first term is now being hailed as we're being cheated? Well, in his words, kind of, so to speak.
President Trump did negotiate the greatest trade deal in history. That's his words, not mine. Though I agree with them. I agree with his assessment, and it holds. And there's many aspects of that agreement that needs to be there. It has two implications for us. One, I do think it reinforces that we need to sit down at the table, understand U.S. concerns, address them where they can, but in a way that works best for Canadians. And we should do that sooner rather than later because this uncertainty has been created. The second thing it absolutely reinforces is we as a country must, first and foremost, build from within, build Canada, build one Canadian market, build broadly across this country. And secondly, it just makes sense to diversify our trading partners. We are one of the great trading nations. We have so much to offer, and particularly in the industries of the future. This is an enormous opportunity for us. There are more like-minded countries around the world that we can build the new architecture of trade and drive jobs that way. So it's, in both respects, a huge opportunity if we seize it.
Hi there, Mark. Lisa Shing with CBC News.
Hi.
And if you're able to also answer in French for my Radio-Canada colleagues, that would be great. So you're committing to hitting the 2% NATO defense spending target by 2030. Why not earlier, for example, 2027, like the defense minister is hoping to see happen?
Okay. It's not just about setting a target between now and the end of the decade, but it's also spending that money wisely and effectively, and above all, as much as possible, potentially the majority of the increase in that money spent here in Canada as opposed to the United States. And I'll refer back to my earlier reference that 80% of our capital spend in defense is in the U.S., not Canada.
And you say you've been speaking with the ministers about tariffs. What advice are you giving them? Are you giving briefings? What exactly are those conversations like? Well,
I'm, just to be clear, fully support the exceptional work of our Foreign Minister, Mélanie Joly, our Finance Minister, Dominique Leblanc, Public Safety Minister, David McGuinty, Industry Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, and all the ministers. There's a huge Team Canada effort going on. They keep me informed kindly. I provide some perspective on that, and particularly with respect to where we go from here, the next phase of potential discussions that are likely to extend beyond the month of February and well into the spring. Thank you. Yes.
Ian Austin from the New York Times. As you travel around...
Welcome.
Well, just from Ottawa. So.
Thank you.
Pizza here.
Yeah, it's very good.
As you travel around, how would you characterize the reaction of Canadians to the tariff threat to the 51st state annexation talk? And is this a fundamental change in how Canadians view not just Mr. Trump, but the United States? Have things changed permanently?
Well, I would hope it's not permanent, but it has been a very difficult time, I'd say, for Canadians. And I have been traveling around and have had very broad range of conversations with Canadians from coast to coast to coast. And I would characterize the reaction as, I think I mentioned in my remarks, initially one of confusion and bewilderment. Why is this joke that wasn't funny to begin with continually being made? Secondly, anger. It's insulting. It's an insult. We are a proud sovereign country. And now that's moving to resolve. I would say, okay, you've changed your priorities. We have our own priorities, and we'll move forward. So that resolve allows for continuing, close relationships in certain areas, but it does reinforce, I think, for Canadians, a real enthusiasm and energy to get on with things on our terms, because we don't want to wake up every morning and check X and Truth Social to find out how our country is being affected. No. We'll wake up, we'll listen to Rusty on the local radio station, right? We'll listen to the CBC, Radio Canada, CTV, Global. Now I'm going to be in trouble because I should list everybody. But please send in your complaints. But take things on our terms. Those messages have set in. And I'll say one other thing, which is the president has his priorities, and I want to commend his focus on fentanyl. It's a crisis in the United States. It's a challenge here in Canada. But the importance of working together on those issues, absolutely respect that, and it's important that we've made progress, and we have to deliver on that progress. But what has been striking, I think, to Canadians is that the attitude that he's expressed in terms of our sovereignty hasn't really been challenged more broadly in the U.S.
And on tariffs too, does Canada have champions now in the United States, or does
I think there is. Look, I'll make an observation. I'm reasonably familiar with a broad swath of U.S. business leaders in many industries. There's a number of things that this administration is pursuing that those business leaders disagree with fundamentally, but they're not talking about it. And their expectation is that eventually the financial markets will wake up to the very real challenges that these measures are going to cause the U.S. economy. You can't suspend the law of economics. I've seen this movie before in Brexit, where steps are taken. It takes a while for the economic effect to come, but it comes. The impact of tariffs will cause inflation. Inflation will cause higher interest rates. Great linkages between economies can be torn apart with real economic cost. And so my impression is that those business leaders, it's more than my impression, I know that many of them are waiting for the reaction, and that reaction through financial markets will ultimately bring a counter reaction. It's a strategy, it's not leadership, it's another reason why we're getting on with our priorities. Thanks. So the question was, the question was in effect on spending, and would we cut any of the programs? Would my government cut any of the programs that had been put in place, for example, on dental care, on child care? Absolutely not. We're very proud of those programs. They're necessary. They're helping millions of Canadians. And the point I was making, which I took too long to make perhaps, but the point I was making was that it's about where we go from here looking forward, and more of an emphasis on policies that catalyze business investment. It's a time to build. On peut bâtir l'avenir. Not growing government spending from here forward using technology and other measures to be efficient.